Gather around, children. We are going to read the 5th chapter in our book, On Tyranny. 20 Lessons from the 20th Century by Timothy Snyder, published in 2017. And we are getting into this book. We are reading this book so that we can educate ourselves to do better, to educate ourselves in order so that we don't repeat the mistakes of the past, specifically 1930s, 1940s Germany. Because of TikTok's algorithm or their quirky rules, certain words have been changed. So keep that in mind as we get into this. Use your imagination for what you think those words might be, but let's get into chapter 5. Remember professional ethics. This one is so important to me. I wonder daily, maybe multiple times a day, where ethics in general have gone and also where professional ethics have completely gone by the wayside. So let's get into this. When political leaders set a negative example, professional commitments to just practice become more important. It is hard to subvert a rule of law state without lawyers or to hold show trials without judges. Authoritarians need obedient civil servants, and concentration camp directors seek businessmen interested in cheap labor. Before the Second World War, a man named Hans Frank was the mustache man's personal lawyer. After Germany invaded Poland in 1939, Frank became the governor general of occupied Poland, a German colony where millions of Jews and other Polish citizens were offed. He once boasted that there were not enough trees to make the paper for posters that would be needed to announce all of the executions. Frank claimed that law was meant to serve the race, and so what seemed good for the race was therefore the law. With arguments like this, German lawyers could convince themselves that laws and rules were there to serve their projects of conquest and destruction rather than to hinder them. The mustache man, chose to oversee the annexation of Austria. Arthur Sayes Inquart was a lawyer who later ran the occupation of the Netherlands. Lawyers were vastly overrepresented among the commanders of the Einsatzgruppen, the special task forces that carried out the mass offing of Jews, gypsies, Polish elites, communists, the handicapped, and others. German and other physicians took part in ghastly medical experiments in the concentration camps. Businessmen from IG Farben and other German firms exploited the labor of concentration camp inmates, Jews in ghettos, and prisoners of war. Civil servants, from ministers down to secretaries, oversaw and recorded it all. If lawyers had followed the norm of no execution without trial, if doctors had accepted the rule of no surgery without consent, if businessmen had endorsed that prohibition of slavery, if bureaucrats had refused to handle paperwork involving unaliving, then the Yahtzee regime would have been much harder pressed to carry out the atrocities by which we remember it. Professions can create forms of ethical conversation that are impossible between a lonely individual and a distant government. If members of professions think of themselves as groups with common interests, with norms and rules that oblige them at all times, then they can gain confidence and indeed a certain kind of power. Professional ethics must guide us precisely when we are told that the situation is exceptional. Then there is no such thing as just following orders. If members of the professions confuse their specific ethics with the emotions of the moment, however, they can find themselves saying and doing things that they might previously have thought unimaginable. Now keep in mind, this also applies to military members. When the Yahtzees went to Nuremberg trials, I was just following orders, didn't fit the bill. That was not okay. That was not an acceptable excuse for doing what had been done and going against the laws of war. Keep that in mind as well.